Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 187.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cashflow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cashflow Diary Podcast. And you know what? Today, we're going to answer a question for you that I know many of you have had. I know a number of you listen, you have full-time jobs, you've got other things that are getting in the way of you being able to exit that job and, most importantly, make the transition to the thing that you believe you are meant to go and do. And today, I have with me a person who I would call a transition expert. That's what I would call. That's not her title, but that's what I would call her. She's been able to successfully leave behind a nice corporate job, then take a year off. That's the key. And then begin to start a business. Why? Because she was prepared. She knew how to exit and make that transition for herself. And we're definitely going to talk to her about that today. Today's guest is Jane Blaufus. You may have read her book, With the Stroke of a Pen, Claiming Your Life. And now it's an educational as well as motivational book, which has gained acclaim and recognition as a much needed, thought-provoking, and planning resource for families and individuals alike. Now, you guys, I know you. You're thinking, well, Jay, I'm an entrepreneur. I don't need all that other fancy stuff. I'm telling you, you do. And that's exactly why you want to listen to Jane today. So help me welcome Jane Blaufus. Jane, you there?
Yes, I am. Hi, Jay.
How are you?
I'm awesome. Thank you. How are you today?
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Glad that you are indeed here. Now, I'm going to ask you the same question that I tend to ask most people, the very first question, because I think it's appropriate, especially as we have these conversations about being entrepreneurs and being prepared. I tend to look at, today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes. So I don't know how many superheroes are of a Canadian nature, but when I say superheroes, I'm thinking Superman, I'm thinking Hulk, I'm thinking Black Widow, Wonder Woman, etc. All of those people have, superpowers that they use in various different ways. And I think entrepreneurs are very similar. We use our special skills and abilities. Occasionally we get dressed up. Sometimes we think we should be wearing a cape and we go out there and use what we know to help and improve the life of, our customers. And just like superheroes, superheroes weren't always super. And neither were entrepreneurs, right? So they had an origin story. They started somewhere. They were just regular, ordinary people. So before we talk about you as a best-selling author, before we talk about you as a coach and speaker, before we talk about how you made an expert transition, what I would really like to know is, who is Jane Blaufus?
Oh, who is Jane Blaufus? I don't have to go back to when I was born, do I?
Well, hey, we got time.
Well, I'm a Canadian with North American reach, and I was born and raised in Montreal, Quebec. Now live in Ontario, near Toronto, and I am just an individual who was born and bred by fantastic British parents who immigrated to Canada with the clothes on their back and started up. I was raised at the knee of an entrepreneurial mother and watched her first 5 businesses tank and her 6th one be an absolute stellar success 3 weeks after she had a radical mastectomy of her right breast. So I have some pretty solid stock in me. Wow. My parents were very inclusive. They gave us an opportunity to learn a lot about business right at the knee of business. My dad was an engineer. My mother's most ardent supporter, and he was the one who helped her with her business plan. I got to see what you had to put together to take to the bank. So, my mother ran a tutu factory out of our basement when we were growing up, because I was always in the dance recitals. I think half the time I went to school with sequins stuck on my rear end or to the bottom of my shoes more often than not. But I got to see the long hours, and, I knew sometimes at the end of the month there were only 2 quarters in the bank to rub together. My father brought drafting home at night to make ends meet after we bought a house. So I've been raised at the knee of an entrepreneur, and today it's stood me in good stead.
I like a lot of what you said there, because there are some basic things that I think sometimes entrepreneurs are surprised by when they go and make that switch. Because you made mention of the long hours, and then you made mention of, I know that sometimes at the end of the month there's only 2 quarters to actually rub together. Now, before we talk about that though, what I really, really like is that you got to watch your mom, I'll say, not succeed as quickly as she would have liked 5 times in a row. And she didn't quit, but she kept going for the 6th. What I'm really curious to know is, what lessons do you think she learned or you learned vicariously by watching that happen?
Well, I realized that being an entrepreneur is not an overnight success. You hear the story, how did you...
What do you mean? It's not overnight? Hold on. Come on. What are you talking about?
Well, everybody thinks, when somebody says, oh, congratulations, how did you do that so quickly? Well, it took me 10 years to get here. I'm not an overnight success. And what I find, and you hear this all the time, like I listen to success CDs, I read, all the books and whatever, and you always hear them say what people don't see is the 95% of the blood, sweat, and tears that goes on behind the 5% when you're out in front and on top. And that's what I saw with my mother, because I lived with it every day. I took over basically running my household for my mother at the age of 12, because she used to work out of the house, and then she took the giant leap and rented a place. And she had this, I'm old enough, and I don't know if you'll remember, but she had this little red Anglia car, and she used to drive like Tony Stewart, and she would peel out of the driveway at like 6:30 in the morning, drive into town, spend the whole day working, come home late at night. She'd work on the weekends, and I just watched her grind it out. And I knew that when I was going to do this, it wasn't going to be easy. And I knew I wasn't going to be an overnight success, but I was a very astute student, and I watched and I listened and I learned. Heck, Jay, I had 2 home-based businesses by the time I was 13 that were flourishing. I was babysitting on the side. I had more money in the bank than the other kids put together. And I just, I learned marketing and sales really, really young, and it stood me in good stead.
I'm going to take a stab and say that your mom never said, don't talk to strangers.
No, no, my mother never said that. She just said, don't play in the rain if the thunder is out and it's lightning. That's what she used to say.
Yeah. I mean, because one of the you just hit on some very, very basic skills, especially with sales and marketing. They're necessary. It's like we try to, make the transition into business and we're like, you mean I got to tell somebody that I have a product or a service? But what if they say no?
Well, the thing is, I have an extensive background in the financial services industry, and I have trained. I've been an advisor. I've been a sales manager. I've run the sales training divisions for 3 of Canada's largest life insurance companies. And, the one thing that never in my career, when I was selling or I was recruiting and training new advisors to sell, never did I manage to sell anything to the 4 walls in my office, no matter how many times I tried.
Yes, exactly.
None of them bought.
Right? Never once. In fact, your assistant should be nervous if they see you too many times. If you,
yeah.
That's when they're like, my job's in jeopardy. They're not in the field talking to people. But I think there's something even more necessary that you walked away with that I'd love for you to talk about? Because you had a set of proper expectations from the beginning. So you weren't on some emotional roller coaster, and especially today. I mean, today it feels like, and I'm not saying this is the case, but it feels like if you go read TechCrunch in about 20 minutes, there's going to be another 15-year-old who just came up with another $2 billion idea and a $12 billion valuation or something. But you can be deceived by so much social media out there that says, yeah, you can do it and you can do it big and it feels and it sounds like it's quick, but it's not. And you had the proper expectations going in. How important do you think that is?
Oh, I think it's paramount. If you go in with rose-colored glasses on and all you do is look at other people and think, okay, well, they look so successful. I coach entrepreneurs, and I love having that conversation. So how are things going? Oh, great. I'm so busy. I don't know which end is up. And so how are things going? Oh, they're wonderful. I'm just so fortunate. I landed this big deal. And then when you really get to the crux of the matter, it's the biggest facade I've ever seen anybody put on, and their life is crumbling behind them because they don't have 2 quarters in the bank to rub together and things are falling apart. Entrepreneurs, so many of them today, work so hard for so little money. And it's because they, for some reason, choose, 1, to do it the hard way, 2, don't believe they need to invest in their own personal development. And I'm huge on having coaches. I totally believe that as an entrepreneur, you need to have a coach, you need to have a mentor, and you need to have an advisory board. And I have all of those things. But back to your comment, Jay, I really was fortunate that I was raised, as I said, at the knee of an entrepreneur because I knew it wasn't going to be easy. And there are days when I can tell you that I get up with a lump in my throat and you think something you've been working on for a while is going to come through, and it's not that it doesn't always come through, but we don't have control over other people's decisions. So depending on what you're working on, I have something that could be very large that I started back on in January, and I'm still haven't even got the proposal in yet, and it's the middle of the year because I'm working with a corporation, and they turn around like the Queen Mary on a dime.
Yeah.
So I had expectations.
Yeah, and if you, by the way, could write an ebook on how to control other people's responses and decisions, that'd be great. I'd be the first customer, just so you know.
I could make a fortune. But I don't understand why somebody else hasn't done it already because it's impossible.
Yeah, well, that would be
the only thing you have control of is yourself.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like that. That's why I'm becoming an entrepreneur, Jane, to have more control. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. How's that working for you?
Totally. So you were working, for we'll call it corporate. A lot of us have been down that path, and it took me a while to figure out that I should have never been an employee in the first place. But once I did, now you're faced with this transition. What I would really love to know is. It's like that moment when, Peter Parker's bit by the spider. He discovers that he's got an ability, but he now has to make a choice. What's he going to do with it? I tend to call that the superhero moment, where you realize, hey, this is what I've got, and here's what I'm frustrated with. What am I going to do now? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I'll back it up a little bit before then.
Okay.
So just to set the stage, my husband, the year before I left corporate, walked out of corporate and walked out of a 6-figure job because he was frustrated and the light had gone out of his life. And I said, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? He says, I want to pound nails. My husband's a very successful general contractor today. A year later, I started realizing that I was very unhappy. And here, let's put this in perspective. I had foot surgery that required me to be off work for 8 weeks. I injured that foot 1 week before I was to go back to work and had to be off another week, and I was thrilled.
Yeah.
I took the pain over going back to work. So that to me was a huge red flag. And we were going through a huge reorganization in my company, and I basically got to rewrite my job description and nearly ran screaming from the building when I saw it because it was totally operational and I'm totally not operational. So I made we had some late conversations at the dinner table, and I went back to work and I sat down with my boss and I said, this isn't working. It's just not working. My whole passion, my raison d'être, everything I loved about my job was gone. And I didn't think I was being fair to myself, nor my family, nor my team. I had 15 people reporting to me, and my heart just wasn't in it anymore. So I told my boss, I said, listen, if you have at all considered, us talking about me making an exit, I'm open to discussion. So I orchestrated my own way out of my position. And I decided I left. All I did for the first 2 months was sleep because the stress that had been in my body for 2 years was so bad I didn't even realize it. And so it was October 31st, Halloween. I hit the budget button at 11:30, went to 2 goodbye parties, and drove out of the parking lot of the building, put Rascal Flatts' Life as a Highway on, full volume, opened the sunroof, and sang at the top of my lungs and screamed all the way out of town, I'm free, thank God I'm free.
Wow.
And then I thought, okay, so who do I want to be when I grow up?
Right.
And that's a big question to ask yourself. And I remember my husband was taking me back for a checkup with the doctor. And I said to him, hey, you know what? I saw a job back at the old company that I just left. What do you think? Do you think I should apply for it? And he turned and gave me this look. He says, I love you more than life itself. But if you go back into that rat's nest, you're on your own. I listened to you complain for 2 solid years.
Wow.
Won't do it again. And even my grown daughter told me that it was the same. And I didn't realize it. So I then left. I hope I'm answering your question. I might be.
Oh, yeah. This is perfect.
So I left and I thought, okay, my mind was in a tizzy. I had all of these ideas. I had all these wonderful things I could do. And the noise was absolutely deafening. And I just couldn't turn it off, but I had to get myself under control first and get healthy again. So we went through Christmas and I had a bit of downtime, and then I started to go, okay. So I started doing the pros and cons list. Quite honestly, I got a piece of paper and I said, okay, if I go back into corporate, what are the pros and what are the cons? And and I didn't really want to go back into corporate, but,
right.
And I'm looking, okay, so I become an entrepreneur. So this is what I know. What are the pros? What are the cons? So I basically did those exercises with myself, but I reached out to people who knew me, who had faith in me, who I knew would be honest with me, kindly honest with me, and I took in and I sought counsel. And I said, okay, so I did a lot of what's the word I'm looking for?
Soul searching?
Thank you very much. I did a lot of soul searching, a lot of talking, but I did a lot of quiet thinking. And I just eventually realized I've never been cut out to be an employee. I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. So it was time to let her out.
Unleash the beast. I love it. It's about that time. And interestingly, you said something that I thought was curious. You said you weren't being fair to your team, your family, but you weren't being fair to yourself. Help me understand that a little bit better.
I was trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. I was trying to make myself fit. I'm just going to digress for a moment because there's a part to this. I had been in the insurance business for about 16 years, and I was almost ready to step off the bus then. I was seriously looking at becoming a entrepreneur there and then. My daughter was 12 and a half years old, happily married and whatever. And one sunny Sunday morning, my 39-year-old husband kissed us goodbye, and that afternoon a police officer walked up my driveway and told me he'd been killed in an accident that morning.
Wow.
So I went from being happily married, wife, mother, career woman, to a widow with a 12-and-a-half-year-old and a financial tsunami and future coming my way. So I didn't really think it was a good time to step off the bus and become an entrepreneur.
Right.
Because I suddenly become a single parent, and I needed to, get my child through the rest of school, university, blah, blah, blah. So that forced me to stay in the employee role. I think I probably would have left a lot earlier, but I did it until I got her through school, got her all taken care of, and then I started to think, okay, is this really what I want to do? And I made a comment to my second husband after I left. I said, my sides don't hurt anymore. He looked at me with this quizzical look on his face, and he said, what do you mean? And that's when I said, I felt like a square peg trying to shove myself into a round hole for quite a while now, and the pain is going away.
Yeah.
So I had to be true to myself.
Yeah, I get that. So during this time, though, I mean, not everybody, because I get the question a lot. Jay, I would love to do real estate. I would love to build a business. I would love to finally live closer to my values and purpose. But I got this job, and I can't exactly take time off to go build this, and it's going to take time to get the business up. How do I make this transition? So you have had one of the best exit and transition stories I've ever heard. Therefore, I'm going to ask you the question, how do they make this transition? Okay, so yeah, you've been thinking about your job, you want to get out, and we're going to get you back to it, and she's going to show you how to make that happen. Of course, there's some preparation, all those types of things, etc., etc., etc. Here's another free gift. It's the gift that I keeps on giving. I call it the Cash Flow Diary, 10 Steps to Creating Wealth in Any Economy, because you are a podcast listener and I like you and all that stuff. You guys keep listening, keep downloading. We're still celebrating over here over just breaking monthly record after monthly record. I'm giving you a chance to grab a free electronic copy of the book. All you got to do is send a text message to 72000. That's 72000, 72,000. The keyword is book, BOOK. Now, that's for those of you who are in the US. You can send a text message to 72,000 and the keyword is book. If you are not in the United States, here's how you must go claim. Go over to cashflowdiary.com / wait for it. You ready? Cashflowdiary.com / free book. I know, right? Very easy. So go over there. You can get your free copy of the Cash Flow Diary, 10 Steps to Creating Wealth in Any Economy, the electronic version. It's sitting there waiting for you. And obviously in the book, I go through the steps that are required to go out there and make your business happen, build some cash flow. It's exciting. Anyway, let's get you back to, like I said before, one of the greatest transition stories I've ever heard.
So I mentioned earlier I coach entrepreneurs, and not every entrepreneur is in a position to exit like I did, nor to do, what you just mentioned and just step off the bus and get started. So do them in tandem. I have a number of clients that I coach that are still at their job, but we're starting to build their exit strategy on the other side and to start to lay the foundation and put the plans in place. And, some of them are taking baby steps. Some of them to get the fundamentals, because you mentioned earlier, I was raised at the knee of an entrepreneur. I knew the expectations. A lot of people I find that want to get off the corporate bus or become an entrepreneur, as we just talked about before, don't have a clue. They think it's a glorious life. It's going to be great. I'll be my own boss. I'll be in charge, whatever. But they don't know where to start, how to do it. So I will often recommend continuing to work and starting to build your exit strategy on a parallel basis.
Okay. And but you were also able to take a year off. That's also uncommon. I think you did something there.
Yep. Well, I was in the financial services industry, and I listened to people who gave me counsel about how to start to build wealth. And I was an advisor myself, but I was never my own advisor. I do not recommend to anybody that they are their own financial advisor.
Do me a favor. Somebody was probably washing the dishes or a kid screamed in the background. I want you to say that again.
I recommend that no one should be their own financial advisor because you take all your advice to heart and think you know what you're talking about.
Okay, cool.
I do a lot of speaking to financial advisors, and I always poll the room and I say, so how many of you in here are your own advisor at home? And they all joyfully, 2/3 of the room stick their hands up and go, I am. I say, good. With all due respect, would you please go home tonight and fire yourself?
Nice.
Because who does your family turn to if something happens to you? And how can you have an objective insight into what it is that you're building? You need help. So I had taken my own counsel. I had worked with my financial advisor, and luckily, when my husband passed away, we had put the appropriate plans in place. And did it stretch us? Yeah. Did it cost us money to do it? Yes. But Jay, in all my years in the financial services industry, I never met one widow or one widower who, when somebody arrived with the check, said, "Nah, I'm good. You keep it."
Yeah, no, I can't see that happening either.
No.
And that's kind of the point that I wanted to drive home is, people ask me all the time, they know when you're out there raising capital and syndicating and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what happens? And sometimes investors are afraid to ask me, what happens if you die? And I'm like, oh, that's a very normal question. Let me show it to you. And we lay out the plan. But I think, and I'm curious to get your perspective. Do you think as entrepreneurs, we are somehow, just by nature, because to be an entrepreneur, you typically have to be positive, meaning it's never going to be bad. So why would I want to prepare for any of this bad stuff you're talking about, Jane?
It might happen to you, Jay, but it ain't going to happen to me.
Right.
That's the mentality I get a lot. So to answer the other part of your question, which I did not answer, the other thing I also did was I made sure that I had all my ducks in a row before I walked out. I had critical illness insurance in place. I had executive disability insurance that I purchased while I was in an executive position, and I made sure that I bought the Cadillac.
Yeah.
I didn't buy, no offense, the smart car. I bought the Cadillac of all of these things because that way I'm in control. I had life insurance in place, personal, not just group insurance, because you don't own group insurance. It's not yours. The way I get people to look at it is consider it a bonus. You're renting it while you work for the company. Right. But where I had the opportunity to convert it and I wanted it, I took it with me. So my husband and I are in an enviable position where we don't need to have a corporate job for benefits, because a lot of families today, it's important. They've got children. They need these sort of things, but there's ways of putting those plans in place before. And because I also had been, contributing to my retirement plans and I had been investing and I had been saving and I had my portfolios balanced, working with a financial advisor, I didn't have to just rush out and get the first thing that came my way to put a benefits plan back in place or to put bread on the table.
Or you didn't have to make that other adverse choice that sometimes is you'll take the first willing client.
Exactly.
You could actually choose who you wanted to work with from the beginning.
Exactly. And I've actually turned away. I don't work with everybody who comes and asks me to, because sometimes the fit isn't right, or I have very high standards and expectations for coaching. And if I don't feel that we're going to be able to work to those standards of expectations, I recommend somebody else. I've actually fired clients.
Nice.
Because they look to me and go, this isn't working. I go, no, you aren't working.
I have that conversation more than once. And it's interesting when you tell someone that. They're like, your system doesn't work. Oh, it does. It does. You, on the other hand, I'm not quite so sure. So while we're on the subject, tell us a little bit more of what you've now that you've decided to grow up, so to speak, and you've decided what it is that you want to do. Tell us a little bit more about what it is that you're out there doing, how you're making a difference in the world.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, my first husband passed away 16 years into my career. He was 39 years old. And being in the business, I thought I had always foolishly thought that if anything ever happened to me, I'd be okay. Well, wrong. I was blindsided by so many things that came my way that I thought, okay, if this is happening to me with all of my training, all of my education, I have a designation in the financial services industry, what in the name of Pete does the average person do?
Right.
Where do they go? How do they get help? Now, I'll fast forward a little bit. I'm happily remarried to a wonderful man who's become a great stepdad to my daughter. I'm so blessed and so thankful. And he was married to one of my good friends who thought she had a toothache in September, and we lost her to 3 terminal cancers the following June. They had a very different situation in their house. Her 6-figure income dried up. There was no critical illness in place. There was no disability in place. There was maximum loans on the life insurance. There was, when he went to the bank to trigger the mortgage insurance, there wasn't any. It was a completely different scenario. Yeah. So we're now a family. And, as I said to you, I had lots of things banging around in my head as to what I could do, but I'd also had a book banging around in my head for a while. And I had been, struggling with, okay, I just don't want to tell the story because, I don't want people to just pat me on the arm and say, I'm so sorry for your loss and walk away. I wanted to affect change.
Right.
I wanted a call to action. I wanted to get people concerned about getting their personal and financial houses in order before something happens. So I'm on a mission to get people to start having courageous conversations across North America. We are going to come into the largest transition of wealth in the next 10 to 15 years in the history of humankind. And the problem is that those who are going to leave it aren't prepared properly to do it, and those who are going to receive it aren't going to know what to do with it.
Yep.
And so therefore money is going to end up going to people that really it doesn't need to go to.
Right.
And so I said, okay, so how do I take the story, but how do I equip people to eat what I believe is this huge financial planning elephant in the middle of a room? Because nobody talks about this. Like, I cannot believe how many people reach adulthood with never having had a conversation about family finances at home where this financial literacy should begin because it's a taboo or off-limit subject. So I want to change that. I want to get people talking about it. And what I did then was I thought, okay, how do I do this? So I spent 2 years researching with lawyers and accountants and funeral prearrangement specialists and all sorts of people, other financial advisors. And at the back of the book, I've compiled a 30-page roadmap and checklist to help people to have these courageous conversations with themselves first, because you got to have it with yourself first.
Yeah.
My husband would never tell me his final wishes. He was 39. He was immortal. He wasn't going anywhere. And right. So I had to do everything blindly, hoping that I was not going to, offend somebody or whatever. So you start with yourself, then you sit down and you have an open and frank discussion with your family. And if you are a business owner, you have it with your business partners. Yep. You need to make sure that there's safety nets in place there, that if you don't hang your business partner out to dry if you become critically ill, disabled, or die, you put plans in place. And then I wanted to help people by giving them questions that they could think about and then go talk to these respected professionals about to get their affairs in order so that, God forbid, anything happens, they're not running around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to find the paperwork or the keys to the safety deposit box or the combination to the safe in the wall. They can do what they need to do, which is either spend time with those they love or try to get over losing someone they love.
Yep. Now, it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure by now it's not one of those popular topics. And you mentioned that, you hinted at it. People don't want to talk about it. And I guess when we're, as entrepreneurs, we're in control of so much. But one of the biggest things that I want to make sure that everybody heard and paused. And this is one of the reasons why, we are doing what we're doing is because of what she said. We're on the verge, the precipice. It's already actually kind of begun. It hasn't snowballed, but it's begun, this transition of wealth that the world has ever seen. One of the largest, period. And those of you, if you were in the class of, going to be where you're transitioning it, there's work that still needs to be done to make sure that it doesn't, I like how you politically correctly said, it doesn't go to places that it shouldn't go to. I'm like, yeah, okay. That's called making sure that the kids get the money if that's what you want and not Uncle Sam or your tax jurisdiction or just charity, whatever. It goes where it needs to go. And for those of you on the receiving end, that's the reason Cashflow Diaries exists, is to begin to prepare you, to help you understand, here's what you can do, here's how you can do, here's the person you need to become. But the question I have for you, Jane, because this is what I'm sure many people are wondering. You said, even with all your knowledge, all your experience, all this, you were still blindsided. What are some of those things that someone would be blindsided by that they're likely not prepared for at this exact moment?
Well, I'll use one of the things that I was blindsided with as a prime example. And you buy, I mentioned mortgage insurance. People buy mortgage insurance to go and pay off their mortgage if someone they love dies. That's why you purchase mortgage insurance. So I went to the financial institution and requested to be able to pay off my mortgage, and I was told I could not. Now, I'm not going to get into the particulars because every provinces and states are different, but it's good to know what goes on in your own home. But in my case, I was told that because we had renewed our mortgage for a 5-year term, a fixed term, and we were only 1 year into the mortgage, they told me I would have to wait to pay it off. And I said, no, that's okay. I'll pay the 3-month penalty because that's what you have to pay in Ontario. And they said, no, you don't understand. You cannot do that. You have to wait till the end of the term. Well, luckily, I had a very good financial advisor who was very well connected. We wrote a couple of letters that went up the chain, that came back down the chain, and I was able to pay it off. But if I hadn't had that support, I wouldn't have known. Here's another example. My husband had leased a truck. My first husband had leased a truck, and I didn't get it. I knew everything that went on at home from a financial standpoint, but his business, that was his. Unbeknownst to me, he had not taken out life insurance or disability coverage on it. So when he died, I had one of 3 choices. I could either buy the truck outright, I could take over the lease payments, or I could give the truck back to the dealer. I didn't want the truck. I couldn't see out of the back of the truck. I was too short-waisted. And it was a constant reminder to me that he was gone.
Right.
So I selected to give it back to the dealership, and they told me that I had to give them a check for $7,500. I said, why? You're getting the truck back. So that was part of the deal. So again, my financial advisor was the advisor on the group plan at the dealership and had it for 25 years and had a relationship with the owner. I gave him a check for $5,000. So they're little things that add up. And, I remember when my husband passed away, the funeral director said, how many death certificates would you like? And I looked at him like a deer in the headlights and said, I don't know, 1. And he said, well, let's start with 15, and if you need any more, come back. I went back for 10 more. Every time you turn around, somebody has their hand out asking you for money. You call to cancel a credit card. If they can stumble over condolences, which they're not very good at, here's what you owe. We'd like a check. It just is, there's so many moving parts. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so adamant about people not being their own advisors and working with an advisor. They're worth their weight in gold. All of these professionals are, because I have a mantra that you can pay now or you can pay later.
Yeah, you're just going to pay eventually.
Yep.
And you're just going to pay. And that's the thing. And especially at that moment, you're it's a phrase I learned from Dame DC Cordova. She calls it emotionally sober. You're not emotionally sober. In the same way, you shouldn't make, important decisions while if you were intoxicated with alcohol or something, you shouldn't. There are some decisions you shouldn't be making, or you're not as well equipped to make during that time period. Well,
Jay, it's funny that you say that, because for 3 months after my husband died, I was incapable of telling my mother if I wanted peas or carrots with my dinner. I couldn't decide if I wanted a vegetable, what kind of vegetable I wanted. And there I was, thrust into a position where I was having to make the most monumental decisions, financial decisions of my entire life. And I couldn't decide on a vegetable.
Yep. And those are the things that we just have to be aware. And I understand, guys. Yes, we're entrepreneurs. We're going to take over the world. But last time I checked, the death rate in North America was hovering right at 100%. It's been that way for a while. And I have a suspicion it's going to continue.
And there's two things in life that are certain: death and taxes.
Well, yes. That's definitely there. Definitely there. So you mentioned this resource and this guide inside of your book. Tell us, how can we, two things in this case then. For those that have been listening and going, you know what, it's time for me to take my business and prepare for that, that just in case. And again, let me ask you this question. Is this for the established business? Is this for the person just getting started? Who is this advice for, in your opinion?
Everyone.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
Everyone has the same need. It's just on a smaller or a larger scale. But we all, at the end of the day, it's for everyone. And the question I get asked is, when should we start? The answer is yesterday.
Yeah, pretty much. I remember. I remember when we were going through that process, and I know the large amount of life insurance that we carry now, and all the things that we have in place, and especially for those of you looking to transition. Some of them, specifically disability, as well as anything that's tied to your income, is harder to obtain after you have left the job. So
yes.
Just keep that in mind. So, if that's something that's just from my own personal experience, it's harder to get some of these defensive measures that need to be in place so that as you're going out there to build your empire, it doesn't get suddenly ripped away. But for those,
Jay,
go ahead.
Jay, excuse me for interrupting, but there's another key thing too, and people don't get this.
What's that?
It's not money that buys life insurance, critical illness, disability insurance. It's your good health.
Okay, you have to explain that one.
Your good health is what buys those products. And it's sort of along the lines of what you've just said. People think, I don't need life insurance today. I'm young, I'm healthy, I'll get it down the road. It's your good health that makes sure that you can get all of those products without being turned down or having to pay an additional premium. So the best time to buy all of this stuff is when you're in good health and you can get it.
Yeah. It's almost.
Don't wait.
It's like a loan from the bank. When you don't need it, ask for it.
Because when you need it, they won't give it to you.
Exactly. Now I understand completely. Excellent. So for those that have been listening and are interested and ready to maybe begin that journey, begin preparation, or at least, if nothing else, pick up a copy of your book for that roadmap that you mentioned, what's going to be the best way for us to track you down?
There's only one way to get my book, and it's from my corporate website, and it's www.jane, and then I'll spell it, BLAUFUS as in Uncle Sam.com. And the book is on there. And also, I'd like to offer to your listeners, I do a lot of work, as I mentioned, with entrepreneurs, and I have some tools available if they're interested in taking advantage of them, sales and marketing. I've got an extensive background in that, being in the financial services and running the sales training divisions, as I said, for those insurance companies. I'd be more than happy. I do a weekly video every week with sales tips. They can just land on the homepage, and there's a little red button that says join the Claim Your Life community. I'd love to have them come and be part of it.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Now, let's pretend for a small moment that there's a person, that is standing outside the superhero outfit store right now. They're ready to pick up their costume. They're choosing the color of the tights, and they're going, do I need a mask? Do I want a cape? They think they do. They're not 100% sure, but in the back of their mind, they've got that nagging little voice that just won't shut up, that it causes them to occasionally doubt, and they go through these spurts of, yes, I can do this, and who am I to really think I could provide some value? What would you say to that person right now?
Well, the funny thing is that you keep referring to this super person, Kate, because I use it all the time in speaking.
Oh.
and we didn't have this conversation before, so I was chuckling when I heard this. And I actually will use a cape in my speeches, and I say, take it off. If the thing is strangling you, loosen it, and sometimes take it off. Nobody expects us to put this super person cape on except ourselves. And we do sometimes, and we tie it so tightly that we just about cut off the circulation. So wear it if you want to, but it doesn't have to own you. And be kind to yourself. You're going to have good days, and you're going to have some not so good days. And that's called life. Yeah. Because even if we're not an entrepreneur, it doesn't always go smoothly. So it's putting plans and systems and processes and support groups and advisory boards and mentors and coaches, putting these things in place and these people in place to help you to even out the roller coaster of being an entrepreneur.
Yep. Sage advice, excellent wisdom. I definitely appreciate you taking the time to invest yourself here with us at the Cashflow Diary.
It has been my absolute pleasure. I've absolutely loved speaking with you, and I hope we get a chance to meet face-to-face at one point, or maybe do this again sometime.
I like the idea. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? That means face that big old pink elephant in the room and get this process started. We've given you resources, websites to go to. I know it's not fun to start thinking about these things, but I'm telling you, you'll sleep better. Your investors will sleep better. And you'll get the courage to go out there and build it bigger, better, and badder, simply because you've done all the right stuff. Guys, gals, it's been fun talking to you today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.